Hello to getting APIs to work. Today we'll talk about patching your HTTP APIs for fun and profit. What does that mean, Mike?
Well, I'm assuming it means that we're gonna have lots of fun, and I'm gonna get some value out of this, some profiting value. I'm very excited about the idea of patch. Now, I'm assuming you mean the HTTP patch method, right?
Yes, so I recently stumbled on some discussions when actually it was about a different mechanism that's currently under discussion for idempotency keys. Doesn't really matter that much, but somehow the discussion wandered into patch land and how this mechanism maybe would be usable for patch. And then I started looking at patch a little bit, and I discovered that maybe it would be interesting to talk a little bit about why APIs may use patch, what the motivation is, how to use it, and what the patterns are out there that we're seeing, because I think patching is probably a relatively common operation that people are trying to expose. So let's just talk about this a little bit and see what we can maybe recommend in terms of what to look at. So when you look at APIs and you talk to customers who are designing APIs, when does patching enter the picture? What's the motivation for that?
Often I have customers who say they want to change a subsection of an existing resource. They think they want, like, if there's 4 or 5 fields, they want to change just the name field, right? They want to leave the email and the address and other things, or they just want to change the password field. They want to do a change password. So they think they want to actually patch up or modify an existing resource record, but just do it in a small way. That's usually when it comes up, when people ask me about that. That's a real challenge to safely modify a subset of a public resource, though, right? I mean, you run some risks when you're trying to just subsection an existing resource. It can get complicated quickly.
Yeah, patching is convenient, and patching is potentially risky because you're kind of touching something without completely replacing it. And then the question is, are you touching the right thing, or has it changed in the meantime? How are those changes being applied, right? So it becomes a little bit more complex, I would say, in terms of what can happen.
Yeah, typically, I mean, to use JSON as an example, you've got a JSON object with 4 or 5 fields. I've got customers who say, well, I'm just going to send one field. Like, I'm just going to send one JSON, like a tiny JSON object with just a simple hash table. And there's an awful lot missing from that story. What if you got dependent fields? I want to change one field, but changing this field actually, means that I should be modifying another field. If I change the selection from, 1 of 5 things to fill in the blank, am I going to change that field and then also send the fill in the blank field? What if there's an incompatibility in some way? What if there's a range value? There's a bunch of things that kind of go wonky, and I kind of discourage my clients from just changing a single field in a resource, and I try to get them to continue to change a whole resource. But there are still lots of patches out there, right?
Yeah, changing the whole resource, of course, is kind of the safer or the simpler thing to do. But if you want to do patches, there are ways to do it. It's not that it can't be done, but the risk, I think, is a little bit what you already said, right? That in the end, the interaction then is not replacing something. The interaction really is about you say what you want to change. And that needs to be a well-defined way how you say that. So in the end, the main work in patching things is actually figuring out this model, right? What can you do with a patch? Can you insert things? Can you replace things? Can you remove things? Can you reorder things? There's many ways how you can patch something, and just sending a JSON fragment in many cases is vastly underspecified. That was my main takeaway.
Yeah.
When I read about how patch often is used in APIs, where basically there's no media type for the patch. They just send some JSON, and then there's like weird implicit assumptions around, well, if I don't send a field, it's not touched. If I do send a field, it's getting replaced. And then there's a lot of like uncertainty around, well, what does that really mean in those edge cases? And And that's what got me interested in that topic.
Yeah. So I think you're hitting on if you're going to do this. So we started talking about the patch method, right? Now we've actually veered right into the format, into the model. So it turns out that it's the patch method is one thing, but it's the patch format which becomes super important. And there are some patch formats to allow you to describe this activity, because now what you're really doing is, like you said, I could add an element, I could move an element, I could remove an element, I could edit an element. And how do I explain? I have to explain all of that metadata. So much about HTTP is metadata. So there are methods, there are formats out there, right, that do this.
Yes, so there are two formats. So if you want to generically change JSON, so you have a JSON-based resource, which you still kind of have as JSON or you see as JSON, and you want to allow somebody to patch that in certain ways, then there are two RFCs out there that you can use, right? There's one that's called, I think that's called JSON Patch, the older one.
Yeah, that's 6902, right?
6902 is called JSON Patch, and then there's a newer one that is called JSON Merge Patch, which is RFC 7386. That one is a little simpler, right? So that one just looks more like a set of conventions. Like if you send JSON that looks like this is what actually happens. The first one, the JSON Patch, is a more powerful and a more complex media type that allows you to describe how to patch a JSON resource.
Yep, it's
have you used either of those?
So I will tell you, I've implemented a version of 6902, the JSON patch. It is complex and demanding. So there are actually a couple of levels of compliance in 6902. There's a version that allows you to test the application. So you sort of apply the change and then return the results without actually committing the change to the final resource, to the data model. It's pretty involved, and I did it because we had a customer who was really committed to doing this, and it turned out to be a really heavy lift. And in the end, my customer did not like using the JSON patch format. They just wanted to send the JSON snippets. But I've definitely taken a run at it, but not 100% fully compliant. How about you? Have you ever done an implementation on this or the merge one?
No, I have to admit I haven't. And I mean, I'm totally with you. I'm pretty sure that even if you do use those in APIs, now if you tell somebody if you want to update a JSON document, here is how you have to write it down, and you look at these JSON patch documents, and they are not trivial, right? There's a certain richness to what you can do, and you have to understand how to use it, and you have to understand how to write the JSON patch for the JSON that you want to patch.
Yeah.
And I think that is not something that everybody knows, right?
No, it's a challenge. So one of the things we tried to do is actually convert a regular HTML form into a valid, patch. So what turns out you're doing is you're saying, okay, do I want to add or edit or remove? Okay, then what is the node I want to add or edit, remove? And then what is the value I want to put? It turns out to be a really, even on the user side, not just on the server side of implementing the receiver, but even on the user side, as you say, of constructing one of these correctly, gets to be quite a challenge.
In the end, I think you can think of that pretty much like a set of edit operations you would have to go through if you did that in your editor, right? If you have a JSON editor, like what would you do, right? You would select this and copy paste it over here and move this and then do this, and depending on the complexity of changes that you want to have, that kind of script, right, that you have to write down might become relatively involved. I think that's the price for like a relatively capable generic framework.
Yeah, I think when you want to get to this granularity, which is really where I think that the challenge starts. When you want to get to this granularity, the smaller the change, the more complex the implications, and especially if you think about the fact that you and I might be editing the same record. Now, both of us might be trying to apply a patch, a set of patch instructions, metadata instructions against the same document. It sort of compiles up and gets really, really complicated. And I'm not sure that the patch method, this getting back to what we started, the patch method really helps me. We're talking all about the format, right?
Yeah, that was my main impression when I read these discussions on the internet and forums. It's like, should I use put? Should I use patch? And a lot of the discussions were just about the method. And I was always a little confused because I thought, well, the method, of course, is important. But in the end, what's more important is like, what do you do with the method? And like you say, the vast complexity of all of this is in the media type, right? In the description of the things that you want to support in your API. And then the question also becomes, okay, now how do I actually get this across to the service if I am a client who wants to apply that patch? And then we're in this discussion of, okay, now am I using patch or
tell
am I
me.
using post, right? That was the other confusion that I had a little bit, that I was never entirely sure, what do I actually get out of using the patch method? Because in the end, for a well-designed API to support patches, it needs to have a patch model, a patch description, a patch media type, whatever you want to call it. So that's where the complexity is. And then you have to send that as part of a conversation. And then the question is, what do I get out of using the patch method?
Right.
And here's my honest question to you. What do I get?
Well, I think patch method, reading through the material, I want to use, I'll just be honest, I want to use put, because put's idempotent and I can safely repeat it. But the problem is put actually has described in HTTP that it's a replacement approach, right? So now I have to have another method. So I think patch was this willingness to say, it's not changing the whole thing. It's actually just changing part. But I don't think I get a lot out of it. And I think you had come up with, usually I talk about put versus patch, but you had a different approach, right?
I was mostly thinking about patch versus post, because that was basically the angle I came from, right? Saying that, well, if I want to interact with a resource in a way that allows me to ask the resource to do something, right, then my general approach would be to say, okay, that's a post, right? I post some representation to the resource. That representation means something, and then something happens, and then I get a response. So that would be, and patching a resource fits that pattern.
Yeah, I think one of the things when we were discussing this, I had not really thought about it. Post is sort of that catch-all. I could make changes. I can make I can append. I could modify that patch. The patch media type with the post method actually might be a pretty cool arrangement.
It certainly isn't wrong, I would say, right? Post is always correct because it's unconstrained, right? You can do anything with a post. So it's definitely not wrong. The question, I think, is more like, is there anything that you get in addition to just being correct technically by using a specific patch method? Or is it just kind of the impression that you get something out of it because it's called patch, even though the real magic, right, is in the media type? So that's where the actual API design work needs to go into that, and not into using a specific HTTP method.
Yeah, and I think you just actually hit on the thing. And this is all about API design. This is all about choices we're making. We make choices as to the methods we support and the models that we use to modify them. And I strongly encourage my clients not to use the patch method because it's such a challenge. Instead, I say, well, let's look at a different design pattern. If you need to make some modifications that are on some sub level, maybe that's a sub resource. Maybe that's another resource you're modifying. Now there are other implications for that. You can't, if I turn a 10 record resource into 10 different sub resources, that becomes super hard to manage as well. So there's some kind of line to draw, but I tend to steer away from patch for the most part.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's fair. I think in the end, you really have to think about not so much just generic operations, but what value can I provide as in an API, right? What do my clients want to do? And I think in many cases, it might be exactly like you said. It might be to say that most of the resource is just there and it allows certain interactions, but I can't just, selectively patch it here and there. There may be 1, 2, 3, 4 fields that maybe I can patch, right? But then even in my mind, I would say that's not so much then a patch in this generic idea of a patch, but it's just 4 different ways how I can tell the resource, now change this, or that, right? And these are just things I can do with a resource.
Yep, so. I agree. I 100%. So so we're getting to the end here. Where's the fun and the profit part? We've discussed.
Where's the fun and the profit? That's a good question. I think the fun could be in designing those media types, right? If you actually do that, because I think it will teach you a lot about the domain complexity, right? But it's a very quick thing to say, let's just support patch. And then looking into these generic media types and understanding, patching is actually a pretty complicated world, right? If you really look into it.
Yeah.
And then for profit, I think that's what I find interesting is that I think it drives you a little bit more towards really thinking about what do I want to support my clients with? What are the things that my clients really need to do? In most cases, unless you're implementing a document store, I would say generic operations might not be the most useful thing for clients.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. It's really to kind of turn profit into value. Like our job, right, is to design APIs that bring value to customers, that solve customers' real life problems. Just coming up with sort of the mathematical puzzle or the sort of HTTP nerdist low-level discussion is the fun part, maybe, but it may not be the profitable part. The profitable part is helping people solve their real problems, right?
Yeah.
I like that. Okay.
So I think our takeaway then is patching in its generic form is maybe a little bit more complex than people might initially think.
Yep.
If you do want to support patch, think about what you are doing, right? Like, don't just do kind of an under-specified, just send me some JSON and I'll do something, right? That's not a good API. And if you want to go the full route, then check out the existing generic formats. Or, like you said, right, maybe also think about, do I even need that? Or isn't it more useful for my API customers, for my API users to have specific operations for doing specific things at a business level, instead of just saying, well, just send me a diff and stuff will happen.
Yep. And my kind of takeaway is just because you can doesn't mean you should.
I think these are excellent closing words.
Okay. All righty. Well, we got that taken care of. I will admit that was fun.
It was fun, and I think it will not be the last one of these a little bit more like deep dives into technical design. I think that's fairly interesting as well. And we already identified, I think, another 1 or 2 candidates. So let's keep this going.
All righty. Good to see you.
As usual, thanks for joining and have a good one. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.